welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to film my best books of 2024 video, which is one of my most anticipated videos of the year, and I feel like I created this channel as an excuse to film this and the mid-year book freakout tag, which we love. It's one of my favorites. I did read a lot of books this year. I read only 48, and I have done better in the past, but I still read, I feel like, some gems that I am gonna cherish in the years to come. But most of the books I read were misses and not hits. But we're not gonna talk about the misses today. We're gonna talk about the hits. So without further ado, let's get into the first book. And by the way, they're all in chronological order because I like it more that way. I'm terrible at ranking, and I'm terrible at just like ranking books with stars. Like, I gave up on ranking books in 2021 and I've never looked back. I never think about star ratings anymore. So yeah, it's just gonna be in chronological order. I am gonna tell you what my top 3 is, and they are ordered as in the first book, the second book, and the third book that I consider the best of the year. But the rest of them, they're just kind of there in the top 9. I don't have a top 10 because why would I? These are like my 9 favorite books. I will have honorable mentions though at the end, so stick around for that if you're interested. The first book that I loved that I read this year was Tomboy Survival Guide by Ivan Coyote, and this is a queer/trans memoir written by Ivan Coyote. I really like books that are about queer people's lives because I, for the longest time, lived in a country that did not really have a lot of out queer people, and so it was really hard for me to visualize what an out queer life looks like. And so ever since I discovered my own queerness, I have seeked out books that talk about queer people's lives. And the best way to learn about queer people's lives is to read their memoirs where they talk about their own lives. And so I really enjoyed this one. I think people who are trans masc and lesbian will relate to it a little bit more than me, but I am non-binary, so I still relate to it in some capacity. And it's a Canadian author, which, you know, we love to see in a publishing world saturated with mostly US and British books. The next book that I read that I loved was Sirens and Muses by Antonia Angress, and I rewatched my mid-year book freakout tag where I kind of described this book, and I was so wrong about what this book is about. First of all, there is no friend group. There is no friend group. There is just a bunch of characters who are students, but there is no friend group. Secondly, not everyone is bisexual. And thirdly, one of the main characters is a professor. But anyways, the real synopsis is there's a main character who's from the American South who happens to go to school in a very prestigious liberal arts New England university, and she paints a lot of like pastoral nature type of paintings, but in this school, which is very like highbrow, people who are upper middle class, she's looked down upon because she doesn't make art that is considered good by these people. And then there's this other girl who's like her rival, academic enemy, and she is everybody's favorite in the school. She's very rich, she comes from a very privileged family. And then there's a guy who is trying to kind of start a little revolution. And then there's a professor who, I actually don't remember anything about him because honestly I don't care. There is queerness in this book because the main character and her academic rival slowly form a friendship that develops into something more. But beyond that, it's also a novel about class and what it means to be at a very prestigious institution and how your upbringing affects the way you move through that institution and how you move through the world at large. which is something I relate to a lot because I'm an immigrant who came to college 1.5 years after I moved to the United States, which is a very huge shift. So I really enjoyed it. I was at the edge of my seat the entire time. Next, I read How to Excavate a Heart by Jake Maya Arlo, and this is a YA lesbian book that's actually done quite well. Most of the queer books I read now are adult books because I'm an adult, but sometimes I find some good YA ones and I'm pleasantly surprised, and this is one of them. So, How to Excavate a Heart is about this main character who's a freshman in college and it's winter break, and they have an internship at this aquarium. I don't remember the name of the place. I just remember they're like a sciencey person who loves fish and is working for a fish lab. As the main character, Shani, and her mother are driving to the new place that Shani is gonna live for the winter, they accidentally hit a girl. But she's fine, don't worry. Or almost hit a girl. Nobody gets hurt, so don't worry about that. And this girl happens to be important later. But I'm not gonna say anything else because I want you to read the book and find out. The next book I read on vacation, actually, was Just As You Are by Camille Kellogg. And this book gets advertised as a romance novel, which I completely disagree with, and a lot of other reviewers disagree with as well. This is not a romance novel, in my opinion. This is a workplace novel. And as a lover of the workplace novel, I was eating it up. There is a woman in her mid to late 20s named Liz, and she's a journalist who works at a queer women's magazine. And all of a sudden, we learn that the magazine is shutting down, which is bad because Liz is gonna lose her job. But then, out of the blue, somebody buys the magazine. Somebody with a lot of money. That means that they still have their jobs. But a lot of things are gonna change because the new CEOs are different. And I'm not gonna say anything else, but there's a lot of drama that happens. There's obviously the romance that develops, but honestly, I didn't care that much about it. It's not the kind of romance that blows your socks off. I think the more interesting parts of the book are the workplace drama and workplace dynamics and how your friends can become your enemies so fast because everybody's selfish and cares about their own benefits. Then I read one of my favorite books of the year. This one I would consider my second favorite. For a long time it was my first, but as I've moved through the year and reflected and changed as a person and grown, I can't say with full confidence that it's my favorite because I'm a different person now. I'm changed. If I read this book in 2023, it would have been one of my favorites, hands down. But because we're in 2024 now, it can't. But it's still very good. And that book is Women by Chloe Caldwell, who I discovered this year, and I can't wait to read more from. I already read her essay collection later in the year, but it didn't become a favorite. Whatever. This is her only fiction work, which, girl, we've been waiting, we've been starving. She's gonna publish a nonfiction book again. Like, I want fiction from her desperately, but take your time. I get it. Women is about a young 26-year-old girl who's an author, but not a big author. She is just setting foot into the scene, dipping her toes into the author waters. She just published her first book and it has been received well, but it's not like, Suzanne Collins level or whatever. She works at a bookstore for her day job, and obviously she writes whenever she has time. And she has just moved into a new city. She still has a boyfriend, but she meets this woman who is 19 years older than her, who's a butch lesbian. And they start this friendship that becomes a very intense friendship. They can't stop messaging each other and texting each other and sending each other book recommendations. And they slowly realize, wait, we don't just see each other as friends, we have feelings for each other. But the things get complicated because the older woman is already in a long-term relationship with a woman. And also the main character is slowly discovering her sexuality. And at this point, she has dumped her boyfriend, but it is a huge moment for her in her self-discovery journey. And she doesn't know what to do with all the information she has recently acquired about herself. So chaos ensues, obviously. I loved it. It was very relatable. I personally have not been in a lesbian situationship, and praying that I never do because it sounds horrible. But it was relatable in terms of finding someone out in the real world and not on the internet who kind of helps you discover who you are. And we all maybe probably have that person. I personally do. And, you know, it usually doesn't end well with that person. Never does. Drama. Lesbian drama. Yes, please. Because this year I did not have any crushes, did not date, did not have the butterflies. I did not connect to it in the same level as I would have if I read it in 2023 when I was doing those things. But it's fine. I'll pick it up later and, you know, find new things that I didn't discover this year. If you're a lesbian or a queer woman who has been in a lesbian situationship, this is required reading. Next, I read my favorite book of the year. That was, for the longest time, number 2, but now it's number 1 because I can't stop thinking about it. It was very, very formative at the time that I read it, and that book is Perfume and Pain by Anna Dorn. This was my first book by Anna Dorn, and I want to read more by her in the future. And it's about this lesbian author, again, who just went through a internet cancellation, and she lives in LA and she just moved into this new place. She has a very weird neighbor. She's in a Zoom writing group that used to be called Les Brat Pack, but now it's called Sapphic Scribes because bisexual girls with boyfriends recently joined. Ah, the drama. And there's a girl at the Zoom group that she has feelings for. And it's also one of the funniest books I have ever read. And sometimes, you know, I reflect on what book do I choose as my favorite book? And most of the time, it does say something about the year that I'm living in. And this year, I would say I really, really needed a laugh. And this book delivered. Because most of the time, literary fiction books are not funny. Most of the time they're sad or they're just plain boring. But this book not only was not boring, but it was also hilarious. If you're looking for a lesbian book that's very unapologetically lesbian, I do this as I cuff my pajamas. Please read this book. Next, I read Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. This has been hyped for a very long time, and not everybody loves it, but I do. Because again, it's very funny. Not as funny as Perfume and Pain, but still very funny. And it's about this woman who's in her 40s, and she transcribes therapy sessions for this sex therapist. And one day, well, I guess it doesn't happen in one day, but slowly over time, she gets obsessed with this woman who she nicknames Big Swiss. And she has a very distinct voice. And one day out in the real world, the main character comes across Big Swiss, but obviously Big Swiss doesn't know who the main character is at all. And they spark up a companionship of sorts. Next, I read Persepolis by Marianne Satrapi. And this is a graphic novel that's actually not a novel. It's a graphic memoir. So, scrap that. It's not a novel, it's a memoir. And this book details the life of a young Iranian girl who is living at a time in history where, or when, the Iranian Revolution is happening, and you hear from her while she's living in Iran, but then later on she moves out of Iran for a better life. And as somebody who is an immigrant, I really enjoyed this book because immigration can be very, very difficult, and it does put a lot of emotional baggage on your shoulders, and it's not something that is easy to do. And this book detailed that perfectly, that despite the fact that she's in a better place right now, she still misses her home. And eventually she does go back home. And don't say I'm spoiling it. You can't spoil somebody's life, okay? And I also really enjoyed learning more about Iranian history because it's not something that I really studied in school. Most of my history education happened in Albania, and I didn't like my teachers back there, so I didn't really pay attention. I still got really good grades though. So I feel like I have a lot of gaps in my knowledge in history specifically. I'm more of a STEM person. I did my undergraduate degree in biochemistry. And so I'm constantly now seeking out books that teach me history, but not like straight up textbooks that make it boring. So this is a great way to learn about history through a story that's actually enjoyable and entertaining to read. And then the last book that is in my official list, that is also my number 3 of the year, I would say, is Trust and Safety by Eve Gleichman and Laura Brackett. They are an author duo. They've written 2 books so far, and I really hope they write more because I love them to bits. And for the longest time, I did not read this book because I had some incorrect assumptions about it. Now, I knew there was a straight couple as the main characters, and I knew they moved in a very old house in upstate New York. And I knew that their neighbors were a queer couple called Dylan and Lark. But for some reason, I thought Dylan and Lark was like a gay man MLM couple. And it's not. And it took me 6 months to finally realize that. Dylan and Lark are a lesbian couple who just have like very non-binary names. So it kept staying on my Libby shelf for months. I kept renewing it and not reading it until one day I bit the bullet and did it. I was like, wait a second, where is the gay man couple? There is none. They're a lesbian couple. There's a straight couple from New York City. They really want to move upstate, so they do. But their house is ginormous and they have to rent some of it because why would they want the whole house for themselves? And so they rent it to this lesbian couple. And then you slowly learn that, wait, they're not just a couple, they're also a polycule and everybody in the town is involved. What is going on? This book is also very funny. The theme of 2024 reading has been books that are funny and books that are very unapologetically gay. Because, hello, have you ever met me? But it also talks about how when you're a city person, the type of life you lead is very different from the type of life you lead in a rural area, because when you're a city person, you depend a lot on convenience. There's a lot of online shopping and delivery and ads, and you can be very susceptible towards those ads, and just everything is very fast and you don't think about things too much. Whereas in a rural area, you kind of have to depend more on community and other people rather than just doing everything by yourself and depending on money. As somebody who's only 22, I haven't really experienced adult life that much. I've only done, I guess, over 6 months now out of school and with a job. And I am living in a city, but it's not like New York City. But it's still a city, so yeah. I don't know what type of life do I want to lead. I'm not partnered or married, or I don't even have the destination job that I want. I am planning to do more school. Life is full of questions that you don't necessarily have answered in the present. and I'm not at that point yet. But yeah, I highly recommend Trust and Safety and the author duo as a whole, because they write exquisite books. And now I do have a few honorable mentions. The first one being The Egg by Andy Weir, which is something I got recommended from TikTok. People were talking about the egg theory, and I found out it originates from this story. And the story is only 3 pages, but it's so good. It's so good. It really made me think on our existence. I kind of live life differently now because of it. And then the other honorable mention is Couplets by Maggie Milner. And the reason why this is not in the official list is because I read this book last year. And the reason why I didn't make it in the list last year was because I read it with my eyes and I didn't like it. But this year I read the audiobook and I did really like it. And it's interesting how an audio experience can change your opinions of a book so drastically. This book is in verse, and the author is a poet. And usually I don't enjoy poetry when I read it with my eyes. But when somebody, and especially the author, reads it to me, I am able to enjoy it. That's something I've learned about myself this year. And this book is about this woman who is, again, discovering her sexuality. She currently has a boyfriend, but then she meets this lesbian. They fall for each other. But the problem is that her lover is polyamorous and the main character is monogamous. And obviously, that usually does not go well. It does not go well. But yeah, read the book, read the audiobook. It's so exquisite. And those were all my favorite books of 2024. Again, my top 3 were Trust and Safety, Women, and then Perfume and Pain, my top book of the year. But obviously all the other ones are good as well. And I'm really excited about 2025. Thank you for watching, and see you all next time with my everything I did in university video, which I will film, I promise. Bye.